Now I want to talk about the hidden transaction costs that a mutual fund will have, but they will never report on their prospectus. They're not required to report this information. And the first one is commissions. When I make a trade with my stockbroker, so I own some shares of Apple. If I want to sell those shares of Apple, I have to contact my stockbroker, place an order to sell, and I have to pay my stockbroker $9.99 for that transaction. And if I just want to sell a single share, I still have to pay them $9.99. If I want to sell 100 shares, I still pay them $9.99. It's per transaction, not the dollar amount of the transaction. A mutual fund makes trades all the time as well. So, for instance, I've got here Vice X, and I'm on the portfolio tab, and I can just see that their top 25 holdings are listed here, and y'all probably recognize like Philip Morris, Reynolds, United Technology, there's Boeing. And here's how many shares they own. Well, they didn't buy 170,000 shares of Philip Morris all at once. They buy them as money gets added. So if people put money in ViceX once a month, then once a month or actually more often, ViceX will take the money that they collect from the shareholders when they make deposits, and they'll use that money to buy shares of Philip Morris or Reynolds or Altria or whatever. And every transaction that they make, they have to pay their broker a commission. So they will make many, many transactions in a month. I might not make a transaction at all in a particular month because I don't do a whole lot of trading through my brokerage account. But a mutual fund will. And so they have to pay commissions on every transaction, and then they will never report that information. But, and so I'm going to go to a broker or brokerage firm for every trade they make. What I do know is that actively managed funds make more trades because not only do they just receive money from investors or have to cash out and redeem shares for investors, which requires selling shares of stock that they might own, they're also actively seeking out companies whose stock they believe to be a good purchase or whose bond they believe to be a good purchase. And they're actively reviewing their current holdings of securities to see if they think now's a good time to sell some of them. And if they think it is, then they may sell all their shares of a company because they no longer view it as a good security to hold in their portfolio. So actively managed funds make more trades. What that means is they have higher expenses and they're going to charge you those expenses. But more trades equals more commission that they'll pay, more commissions they'll pay to their brokerage firm. Now, they won't report that information, but what we can look at is the turnover ratio. I can't remember if I talked about this in an earlier lecture, so I'm just going to talk about it again in case I didn't. But the turnover ratio, I'm not going to go into how it's calculated, but if I take 1 and I divide it by the turnover ratio, the answer that I get is the average number of years. Apparently, my space bar has got problems, but it's the average number of years the fund holds a security. So I'm going to go look at, that's not where I want to be. Oh, it's here. I want to go look at the turnover ratio for Vice X, and that's on the main quote page, and it's reported right here, so it's 0.78. And let's contrast that to Vice X, not Vice X, the Vanguard 500. So their turnover ratio is only 3%, huge difference. So for Vice X, I'm going to take 1 divided by 0.78. That's going to give me 1.28. So on average, Vice X holds a stock for 1.28 years before they sell it, but Vanguard 500, it's 3%. So 1 divided by 0.03, that's going to be, just to show y'all, 33.33 years. So Vanguard 500 holds a stock on average for far longer than the Vice X fund does. That just means this company, like if their level of assets were similar, this company, this fund would pay far less in commissions than the Vice X fund because they make far fewer trades. Another, not sure if, which way works better for you. I just hit return so I can get the material I'm typing sort of in the middle of the video. But another hidden transaction cost is what they call a spread cost. For that, I need to explain a little bit about a stock. When we look up a quote for a stock, and here I do want to go to the Yahoo's finance website. So I looked up the quote for Boeing because I noticed that when I looked at the portfolio for Vanguard, not Vanguard, I want to do Vicex, sorry. So if I look at the portfolio and the holdings for Vicex, I see that they do have Boeing as part of their holdings. They have 45,300 shares that they own of Boeing. And I'm just going to say, for the sake of argument, they want to sell all of them. So they're ready to sell. What price will they be able to get? Here we need to look at, I mean, I've always been talking about this price when I've talked about stock prices before, but now I want to talk about this price. There's a bid price and an ask price. The bid price is the price someone will pay to buy shares from you. So if you're selling, you're going to receive the bid price. If you're The ask price is the price that someone is asking you to pay if you want to buy them. So if you're buying them, you have to pay the ask price. So bid is the price a trader is willing to buy the shares from you for. The price a trader is willing to pay if they're going to buy shares from you. And then the ask price is the price a trader is asking you to pay. Oh man. So in other words, the trader will sell to you for this price. And you'll notice that there's a difference between the bid and the ask price. Wrong website. So the ask price is $148.30. The bid price is 147.9. That's a what, a 40 cent, which is high. It's huge actually. Bid ask spread. Right now the market is open, and so I'm sorry, right now the market is closed. So I wouldn't rely on these numbers. This should be much tighter. So if I had been recording this video when the market were open, these prices would be up to date and probably much closer together. But let's just say I decided to purchase some shares of Boeing, and these prices were accurate and current. I wanted to buy some shares of Boeing. It would cost me $148.30 to buy them. But and then I wanted to instantly turn around and sell them. It would I would only receive $147.90 per share to sell them. So right away I've lost 40 cents a share. That's called the bid ask spread, the 40 cents. and the ask price will always be higher than the bid price. And I'm going to look at another company like Microsoft. I mean, I know they typically have a really small bid ask spread, and here again they do. It's only a penny. It's just the Boeing bid ask spread to be that high is really weird. But I'm going to go back to Boeing because I'm going to want to use this for the next thing too. So the because of the bid ask spread, we'll always end up losing money on that if we buy and then instantly sell. Will always result in losing money if we instantly sell shares right after we bought them. The third one is what they call market impact costs. So we knew that ViceX owns 45,300 shares, and let's say that they want to sell them all tomorrow. And so let's also assume that these numbers are accurate. Well, they're only required to report the best bid price and the best ask price. And what I can see, and so if I'm selling those 45,300 shares, I'm ViceX and I'm trying to sell all of those, they will someone will buy them from me for this bid price, but they're only willing to buy 300 shares at this bid price. The There are other people willing to buy shares of Boeing, but they're not willing to pay this much. So they've reported the best or highest bid price of 147.90, and only 300 shares are being offered to be purchased at that price. There are more shares people are willing to purchase, but for a lower price than this. So we I can't remember what that number was. I 147.90. So we know there were 300 shares at 147.90, and that was the best possible bid price that existed because that's the one that was reported, and that website only reports the best ones. So I know there are others, but they're at lower prices. There might be somebody willing to buy 400 shares at 147.89. I don't know that information. I'm just kind of making this up to show you. And there might be somebody willing to buy 600 shares at 147.88, and somebody willing to buy 1,000 shares at 147.86. So eventually ViceX would be able to sell all their shares, but they wouldn't be able to sell them all at 147.90. And the price that they would be able to sell them at would be constantly decreasing if they're trying to sell them all right away. Because they have to keep going down the list of people who are willing to buy them, and they're willing to buy them only at cheaper and cheaper prices. So, so they would have to make a lot of transactions to actually sell all 45,300 shares that they own. But that's what market impacts costs are. The like if I only had 100 shares to sell, then I could sell all 100 to this person who's willing to pay me 147.90. But because ViceX, I'm pretending, is trying to sell all of their shares and they own a lot of them, 45,000, it's going to take them a while to sell them all throughout the day, and again at consistently lower prices. The Oh, actually, that's the last one. So there's just a couple of other things I want to talk about. The average annual total cost, if we were to sum all these costs for mutual funds, for an actively managed mutual fund, it's about 3.3%. So that's a lot. So if that fund earned, let's say, 10% before fees, after deducting all the fees, we would only be earning 6.7%. 10% minus this 3.3. So that's a huge chunk of return that you're not getting because you're paying all those fees. That's why we suggest that you look for no load index funds because they have, excuse me, they don't have any loads, they have low annual expense ratios, they have low turnover, so they have low commissions that they pay their brokerage firm. Because they trade less, they won't be as impacted by these market impact costs and the spread costs. And I mean, mutual funds have been around, for about 100 years, although they didn't become really popular until about the 1980s. And finance researchers have been conducting research on what sort of things, what sort of traits does a mutual fund exhibit that leads to high performance? Because if we could narrow down certain characteristics that a mutual fund had that suggested that it was going to do well, then we could limit our investing in mutual funds to that set of or funds that have those characteristics. So, lots of researchers have looked at mutual funds and they've tried to figure out what factors predict good performance for a mutual fund. They've looked at the size of the fund. The idea behind that is once a fund gets really huge, it could be difficult to manage all that money. Maybe it's hard to find good investments because if it's a small cap fund, especially, small cap funds by their nature invest in small cap companies, and the more money that's deposited into the fund, they have to find more small cap companies that meet their criteria, and that could just be difficult to do. So the idea is smaller funds with smaller levels of assets are perhaps more agile, able to find better companies that exhibit the characteristics of what they think makes a good investment. But they have found there is no relationship between the size of the fund and the performance of the fund. So that one's out. I'm gonna just put an X there because just a signal note size of the fund didn't have any relevance to the performance or relationship. The second factor is the manager tenure. And by that, I mean if we go to the fund and I look at management, I can see who manages the fund and how long he's been there. So Gerald Sullivan has managed the fund since June of 2011. Before that, it was Jeffrey Middleswart, who only was there for a little over a year. That's management tenure. How long have they been there? Like this guy had a really short tenure. This guy's been there for a few years. And the idea is maybe a manager is really good, and if that manager quits managing that fund and moves to a different fund, then maybe you should sell your shares in the fund that he quit managing and move to his new fund because it's really the fund manager who's doing generating the positive performance. But they found out management tenure didn't matter. Another thing that they looked at was turnover. Do funds that have higher turnover do better because they're actively managed and they're doing a good job at choosing securities that are mispriced and selling them at the right time and buying them at the right time? Or do funds with low turnover do better because they trade less, they're passively managed? And does the passively managed idea indicate better performance? And they found out there was no relationship. Another thing they looked at was risk measures, and there's a variety of risk measures. I'm not going to cover them. The only thing I've talked about in this class with respect to risk measures is the standard deviation. So essentially, how risky is the fund? Are riskier funds performing better than low risk funds? And they found there was no relationship. They also looked at the Morningstar rating. I've never actually talked about this, but it's pretty, well, I certainly didn't mean to click on that. Hopefully it won't open. But if I look at a fund, oh gosh, I accidentally opened Pandora and it started blaring and don't know if y'all heard that or not. I think you probably did. But so with Morningstar, they rate funds. I think the highest rating is 5 stars, and the lowest is just one. I don't think they give a fund 0 stars. So 3 stars is only a moderate rating, but they'll look at the performance of the fund and how high their fees are and things like that, and they'll grade it with these stars. And so if and Morningstar does offer a premium service, which I believe I've talked about, and it's expensive. It's about $200 a year. Well, let's say you're paying for these ratings, and you would expect then these ratings to mean something. If a fund gets a 5 star rating, then it should be, in your view, a good fund. So researchers have looked at that. Do funds that get high ratings on Morningstar tend to perform better than funds that get lower ratings? They found no relationship. They've also looked at past performance. The idea being, do companies that do well in the past keep doing well? Or if companies do poorly in the past, do they suddenly exhibit this turnaround and start doing better in the future? Or, I mean, so basically, is past performance an indication of future performance in any sort of way? Is there any relationship? They found no relationship. And then the last thing they looked at is expenses. So basically, do funds with low expenses tend to do better than funds with high expenses? And that's actually exactly what they found. So funds with lower expenses tend, they don't always, I'll just say tend to outperform funds with higher expenses. So that's one reason we argue for looking at funds that don't have all those expenses or have low expenses compared to the other types of funds. So look for no load funds, look for funds with low turnover, look for funds with low annual expense ratios, because in all likelihood over the long run these funds are going to perform better than, equivalent sized funds with higher expenses.